So thanks very much for inviting me and thanks for coming along to listen. So basically what I'll be talking about in time and space, first of all I'm going to look at some place names. Now I should say as well, I know that some of you probably know quite a lot about place names, maybe some of you don't know that much, and so I'm trying to steer a kind of a middle course here, and if I kind of lose some of you, maybe the best thing would be ask me afterwards, and I try to explain it better what I'm about. But just some of the things I'll be talking about are as follows. When you look at place names, what I mean in time is when you collect the historical evidence for place names and you arrange it chronologically over a long period of time, you'll see a pattern sometimes emerges, maybe that names change, that a sound change occurs, and maybe that means that the name changes and that the understanding of the name changes. That's also responsible for some of the names that are obscure. There are some names that we don't understand. Some of these, of course, are very old. But as we'll see, sometimes if you have enough evidence and you go through it correctly, you can sometimes, what is obscure can become transparent. Just a few other things then after that. I want to say a little then about to look a little bit more on the place names of the Barney area here, Liostaí. And the way I'm going to do that is, and this will have a little bit more to do with place names in terms of space, I suppose, would be if you look at the structure of names. Now, what I mean by that is, if you take a name like, I'll come back to it later, Lochmore, I suppose this is called locally now, where you have, it's made up of two words, Luach, meaning rushes, and Ma, meaning a plain. And if you were to construct, if the same name in modern Irish, we say from the 12th century onwards, if the same two elements were put together in modern Irish, you'd have quite a different name. You'd have Ma no Luachra. So, by looking at the structure of names, you can get a chronological idea of their age as well. Then I'd like to say a little about maybe the names that have personal names and surnames in this Barney, and a little about the word which is of great importance in Tipperary. It's very, very, very common in the placenames of Tipperary, the word Baile. I'd like to say a little about that, and maybe finally a little just to look at some of the common words that occur, the most common words that feature in the place names of Tipperary, in the Irish names. So I'll start off so. When we reflect on the place names of a certain region in Ireland, like County Tipperary, the following lines of inquiry are some of those that come to mind. The correct or original names, their meaning, and when they were formed. In order to interpret the correct meaning of place names, we must firstly restore or bring to light their original forms. This initially involves an examination of each individual name and how it evolved or was preserved in the course of time. An example of such a place name is Clonouty. The name of a village and parish, which we all know well, between Holy Cross and Dunrown. It is often translated as Meadow of the Ulsterman, a traditional explanation recorded in the locality by the place name scholar John O'Donovan in 1840. When we arrange the historical evidence of the name in chronological order, a different picture emerges. The earliest examples of the name from the end of the 13th century to the end of the 16th century, although recorded in Latin or English documents, correspond, in fact, to Cluain Owl, meaning pasture of the apple trees. From the first example there onwards. The genitive singular form of the word owl, that's Antish Benedict in Irish, namely Aula, is then substituted for the plural form in the 16th century. So basically what happens is you have Cluain Owl of the apple trees, that changes to Cluain Owl, meaning a singular of the apple tree. And you can see here, when you look at the name, that something else happens here in the 17th century. You see a T comes in, but it's not present before that. So what we find is we have an intrusive T, if you like, that appears between L and the final vowel in the early 17th century. We also have this in other words in Irish, such as Muilte, which is the plural, which means mills, but it comes actually from an earlier plural form, Muile. And also the place name, you might have heard of it, Carrigaholt in That comes from Pádraig Ó Cearbhaill, meaning the rock of the fleet. But we haven't recorded even not so long ago when I was still spoken in that part of Clare, and also in manuscripts it was written Pádraig Ó Cearbhaill with this intrusive T. The townland of Liostaí, about 9 kilometres north of Cluain, may be another example of this word also. Therefore, the large number of references to Cluain, beginning with the ecclesiastical sources of the 13th century, it means that we can reconstruct the historical phonology or the sound change of the name. So a sound change happened. As we have noted, in the case of Cluain, place names can change in the course of time. The following are further examples of a sound change that occurred to 2 place names, leading to a new interpretation or meaning of the names. So the first one is Thiobraid Árann. When you've heard of that, it's near Carrigan Shore, Liostaí, we know where it is anyway. And there's also another town of the same name near Lemley, the very same name. The original Irish name in both cases is logainmneacha, meaning the townland of the canons, ecclesiastical canons. The former name was translated as actually homestead of the Souths by Pádraig Power in placement of the DCs. The reason being that the name, if you just look at it from a modern point of view, if you look at it from the modern point of view, Ballinagránach, the N banana becomes Ballinagránach, and then the N changes to R, which often happens in Irish, but not so much in Munster, but there are examples. You know, in Connacht, in Connemara, you have Crug for Crug. It's the very same thing. You have N instead, N becomes R. And Ballinagránach is actually quite similar to Ballinagránach, meaning the homestead of the Souths. But, as I said, when you construct the historical picture of the name, it's somewhat different. The other, John O'Donovan, then he translated this name here. By the way, NB means name book. The name books that were used by John O'Donovan and the Ordnance Survey, the place name scholars in 1840 can work on the mapping work for Tipperary was underway. ROD are forms in the Registry of Deeds from the 19th century, certainly begins in 1708. And I won't go through all the names now of the documents, and don't be too worried about them, but Inquisitions are the Inquisitions for Tipperary, which are Latin documents from the reign of James I up to Charles II. They're in the Royal Irish Academy. But as we can see, in this case, we can be certain of the Irish form because it's here in Irish, in a Gaelic text called Seanachas Búrcach, which has to do with the birth lands in Tipperary and Limerick from about 1550. And Sheshruch meaning ploughland, but the second part is the very same, Sheshruch in Logainmneacha. Therefore, I've explained how the change came about, that N changed to R, and that led to different meaning. So in the foregoing examples, the original meaning of the place names become transparent as a result of collecting and analysing the historical evidence. In the 2 following place names, although the original form of the name is not immediately clear from the historical evidence, I think the restored Irish forms are justified. So the first example is a place called Tiobraid Árann, which is now within the town of Cluain. There was formerly a mill here belonging to the Cistercian monastery of Liostaí. And the first example there, Mullin Deer, the mill of this place, is from 1534 to 5, and you can just see the other historical examples there, some examples. Now, the additional vowel following Tubber, what I'm saying here is if you look here, Tubber and H straight afterwards, there isn't any vowel. There isn't any Tubber Ahine, if you know what I mean. There's an extra there's an extra vowel there that has come in, that has influenced our understanding of the name. The additional vowel following Tubber isn't evident until we come to the entries recorded in the Ordnance Survey Name Book of 1840. So we have, you see the different examples there in Irish that were probably unsure of the name. They obviously where they've written the Irish name in different ways, Hine, Ahine, and even Nahine. The last mentioned form, Tubber Nahine, was also favoured by Canon Power in placement of the decies. Not alone that, but he explained it as Friday well, a holy well at which rounds were made on Fridays. But as there isn't any reason why this year, if you start off with Tubber Nahine, there isn't any reason why that N should actually disappear. You can compare it to, I had an example there from, there's an example here, Turdus, Bohor, Nomona, which is the very same, and the N doesn't go. It doesn't make any sense. So the difficulty is that Tubber Nahine, it cannot be justified on the grounds of the historical evidence of the name. So we have to discount that explanation, discount it. Therefore, there is an early word in Irish, I'm sure we have it here now. No, I haven't. It's a word called Tioin, T-R-O-I-D-H-I-N, and it actually means a mill stream. It's also found in modern in Dean's dictionary. So therefore, Tubber Hine, from these early examples here, meaning well of the mill stream, is in all probability the correct name. As you can see, there was a mill there. Now you might have heard of this place here. It's a little bit unusual when you look at it. The townland of Manna, I think it's pronounced, north and south. Have you heard of it? It's near Temple Road. And it appears to be obscure in origin and in meaning when you look at the name as it is there. So even when we look at the historical evidence of the name, the examples are there in Latin or in English texts, but they try to write the names phonetically as they were pronounced in Irish. So if you look at the example there from the 16th century from the Árann deeds, and the name book, O'Donovan probably wrote meaning uncertain, but he then wrote, he attempted this meaning Mo Nna, as if it was a personal name, and here there's a question mark after it. I believe that that's probably close to the correct name, to the original name. In fact, there's an Irish name in a text from about the 11th century, which has to do with the O'Brien lands. It's called Gaeltacht, and it refers to various strongholds in Cashel and so on. And one of the places is this place, Mo Annig, the plain of the marsh or swamp. And I think actually, I'm not sure if that can be connected, but I'm pretty sure, I'm pretty certain that that's actually the correct name of this place name, and I'll explain why in a minute. What happened basically was this, that the word maw came to be pronounced in Irish when you had two words as mo. There are quite a few examples of that, M-A-G-H, a plain came to be pronounced as mo. Because I won't go into now, the stress would be on the next word. So it would be pronounced something like mo anna. And then these two vowels here, the two sounds, mo anna, they coalesced, or they ran in together. And basically the O was elided, the O was dropped. And exactly the same thing happened in the case of Malo, which actually, I know there are all sorts of other explanations, but a long article has been, Tiobraid has written an extensive article about this place name, and the correct meaning of it is Mo Allah, the plain of the stone. And this place name shows the very same development in phonological development in the sound of the Negro. So another example of elision of a final vowel of Mo, before a word beginning with another vowel is or Mooney, I think it's pronounced. Have you heard of Mooney? Have you tried it? Yeah? Maybe you haven't. It's near Ballingarry. Maybe you haven't heard of it, but there is such a place name, all right, and it's an old place name. It's an old. It's beside a place called Cluain, which is near it. At any rate, Saint Shinach A female saint is said to be from Cluain Muiauna in a number of early Irish sources, such as the Martyrology of Tala, about 800. Cluain Muiauna is now the parish of Cluain, which adjoins Mooney or Muiauna. The meaning of the final word in Muiauna is unclear to me, and it isn't river, There is one final example that I can think of in the Barony of Liostaí, in which Ma, M-I-G-H, becoming Mo, and the initial vowel of the following word, coalesce, come together, and that's, you've heard of that place, mine. So basically, we have two examples of this name in Irish, in the Marcher Lords, which are should be classical, modern Irish poetry, two poems. And you see it's spelled in both places. And the first example, the meaning of that would be simply the playing of the ivy. And the same thing happened. The two vowels came together here, mo and ein, and they form money. So up to now we have been talking about place names in terms of time, by forming an historical picture of the names, as it were. The original forms of the names become apparent. So, by looking at the evidence, we were able to get at the meaning of the names, in other words. Now, however, there are place names in County Tipperary and elsewhere that remain obscure in meaning, even after analysing their historical forms. So, I would like now to refer to some of the town and parish names within the Barony of Liostaí that are obscure, or in some cases where part of the name is obscure. Firstly, the name of the barony, Éile. It has been classified by the well-known scholar and patriot logainmneacha in a groundbreaking paper many years ago entitled Irish Population Groups, which was published in 1910 as far as I know, as belonging to the oldest strata, the oldest level of Irish population names, which he calls plural names. Other examples would be Oni and Dara, Uine and Dara. And one of those, Uine, is found actually in a very early map from the 2nd century that was made by a geographer who lived in Alexandria called Ptolemy. So they're very old names. Well, I won't go into the history of it now, but you know, Éile was divided then into two sections, Éile Deisceach, which became Éile Yogurt, and Éile Tuaisceach, or the northern Éile, which became Éile Carroll. But the point though is that the name, of course, is well documented, and after that in Norman documents, documents from the Anglo-Norman period, but we don't know what it means. Now, the total number of obscure place names out of the full complement of parish and townland names in the Barony of Liostaí is, in my opinion, quite small. I believe that less than 10 names in all. That doesn't mean that I could tell you instantly what every name means, but the number is quite small. And I'm going to say a little about some of those names. You might know this place, a place called Newark, near the parish of 2 Mile Burris and New Hill. Do you know where those are? You know somebody over there. So, I don't know whether a connection is made traditionally in the locality still between those names or not. But the understanding is there are two townlands now, two different townlands beside one another. And basically what happened was, as you can see right here from the 18th century, you see the way Newark is written here, Neward, and here you have the townland, that part of Newark called New Hill. So New Hill is quite a modern name. And the reason it came about is that it was understood to mean, it was understood, we call it folk etymology, or local meaning of the name was understood to be new ord, new height, or new hill. But I don't believe it's correct actually, but you see even here, Newark was the way it was pronounced in 1840 in Irish. The reason I don't think it's correct is for this reason. There are many examples of the adjective nua qualifying a noun in Irish place names. So you have names like Baile nua and so on, and nearly invariably, nearly always, out of all the places I've examined, the nua comes after the noun it qualifies. So Baile nua. Whereas this is completely different. For this to be correct, you have to presume that nua is the first element, is a qualifying element, and there aren't. I can think of one example, and that's all. And I don't believe, looking even at the early examples there. So I think all you can say about that name is that its origin is obscure. You don't know what it means. Another name that you might have heard of is Cluain in the parish of, we call it Loughmore East. Again, I discussed this name in the book I wrote about Cluain in the Placenames of Tipperary. The Irish version and translation of the name that John O'Donovan recommended in the name book, Cluain Nunlocog, pasturage of the young pigs, is highly unlikely. The reason being that there are precise words in Irish for young pigs, such as banov, so baig, mucog. Yeah. The final element of the following two place names is also obscure. I'd say you probably heard of these as well, Fishmoy and Cill. Again, they're beside one another, if you like, and they both come from the same word, except that Cill or Chai, church, has been added here. These are just two different anglicised forms of the same basic place name. And actually, that Fishmoy is earlier than you'd imagine. It's actually, we've got a reference to that in the 17th century. This fish instead of fit, moan or whatever, okay? So I just talk a little bit about that name now. So it's the name of a townland. Kilfitmore is the name of a townland in parish, and Fishmoy is the name of a townland within the parish of Kilfitmore. Early examples of the place name are preserved as glosses or commentaries in various Irish legal manuscripts, where it is called either Tír or Fia, and this is probably the earliest form of the name Logain. So Fia means, if I aggregate, it doesn't mean a deer now. That word there in early Irish, it spelled like that. In the modern Irish, it's spelled like that. It means uncultivated land. So we have the name from we know what that word means, Fia, and it was also Cheer was also used to refer to it, and we know what child means. But the final element, we don't know what it means, or we don't have any idea. So in other words, it's obscure. So I'm going to give one further example of a place name in Liostaí, which I think, again, the meaning of which is obscure. Is this my card here? So the historical evidence is well documented, although usually in Irish and in English and Latin documents, and it's all the spelling would seem to be kind of reasonably consistent with this my crackge or crackge. So ma or mo, MIGH means a plane. But so John O'Donovan, he suggests here that this word crackge, that it's actually just it's just a different form of the word critge, or another critge, or in early Irish critge was actually pronounced corca, meaning plain of the oats. But the difficulty is that there isn't any such variant in Irish. In any stage of Irish, there isn't any example of this variant. So again, I mean, you can't just take the easy option, and I think the best thing to say is that we don't know what the second element means there. Now, some names that are unclear in meaning are, of course, very old, such as river names like the Suir, the Nore, and the Shannon, all of which flow through Co Tipperary. In terms of space or distribution, there is an interesting group of adjoining parishes beside Tipperary town, the names of which, although well documented, are obscure in meaning. So they are Latin, Salahad, and Stronan. I'm not going to say much about Stronan, except that it's well documented, and in the genitive, that's in where in the tissue, where you have another noun before it in Irish, a place name, when it's understood, I put it like this, when it's understood, would normally change. So you would expect, if this was a word that was readily understood, you'd expect a different form, I think, here. I'm simplifying things now a little bit here. But you see here this example from the poetry of Liostaí, that it doesn't change. And here you have trua, meaning, you know, an old Irish kingdom, if you like, or throne, and it goes back to the evidence from the papal taxation is right back there at the beginning of the 14th century. But I think that name is opaque. Now, the other two names, now again, it's interesting that they're all near one another, and they're early names. They must be because they're the names of parishes that are well documented. So, Throne, Salahad now. In an Irish glossary attributed to Cormac MacCreanine, who was King and Bishop of Cashel from 896 to the beginning of the 10th century, the word Salchoid, this word here, is said to derive from Sal, a willow. This is now in the Irish, Old Irish at the time, is said to derive from Sal, according to Cormac, Sal being a willow, and Coid, which is his Coil Ishin Heinrich. In other words, a wood in Welsh, or Old Welsh at the time. So he basically says that it comes from Sal, and the word that he was familiar with, of course, Welsh or Old Britannic was a lot more widespread, was spoken by much greater percentage of the population of Britain at the time. So maybe the word Britannic is actually better to use. But at any rate, he figured that that's what the name meant. But the difficulty with that is that if we look at other early examples of the name, it's difficult to reconcile the early spellings with the different vowel that we have here. So these are early examples in Irish. The Annals, Munster Annals, and Inishfallen, 967, very early examples. And this which has to do with the wars between the Vikings and the Irish, covered by the Red Gallis. And in each case, you don't have Sal, you have a U, Sulchoid. And you can't really reconcile what's Cormac's meaning, although it would be nice, wouldn't it? What would that throw if you had a word Coid, a Welsh word, in the middle of Tipperary, but you can't, this place name doesn't support that. Now, there's one thing about it, I got a little interesting quote about that part of Tipperary, where we're talking about here. It was known as Ónach Agid Cill. That's where that population group were dominant there at one time. And F.J. Byrne, in his book Irish Kings and High Kings, he describes it as a veritable palimpsest of half-submerged tribes in the early period. Palimpsest is it's a manuscript that has been rubbed out and has been written on again. So it's like as if these tribes were laid on top of one another. So it's kind of interesting though that you find these names here that are obscure in meaning and that are old. Now, so up to this we have looked at individual names from the point of view of their historical development. And I've also touched a little just now on names from a spatial point of view. I now wish to examine the place names of the Liostaí in their totality as well. And one way of doing this is by analysing the structure of the place names. And that will give us, as I explained at the beginning, a relative idea of the age of the place names. So first of all, we have to get the number of names we're going to be talking about. The total number of townland names within the barony, excluding subdivisions such as Belden Moor and Upper and Lower, is 242. There are a further 7 parish names that are not townland names, so that's 249. However, I have included in that number townland names of English origin for which we have an historical Irish name. So a good example of that is that name, Rensborough, is obviously of English language origin, but there is an Irish name for it. So I'm including those. I'm not in the total number of Irish names, if you like. You can see the earlier name there is Máhi Cua, meaning the regital fort. Just one interesting point of view, meaning the regital fort. Just one interesting point of view that you might be interested in here, by the way, passing. If you just saw here in the Registry of Deeds, the second name here, Droleen. Yeah, you heard of that before? And is it the same as Renfrew, do you think, or is it supposed to be different? Yeah, it is. But Droleen, I think that Renfrew came about as a misunderstanding of Droleen. Droleen, if you pronounce Droleen as Droleen, Droleen, which is quite similar. Droleen is the Irish for Árann or Árann. So I think that's how that came about. But it would be a misinterpretation of this word, I think. Right. So another example of the name here, which is quite interesting, that I've included amongst the Irish names, in this case, Cill. The reason being that you can see in this case that in the one reference there, in the same reference, we have actually the Irish name and the English translation. So you have Cnucht na Fine Shodia, although it's written according to English spelling, otherwise Cill. So again, we can include everything amongst the names of Irish origin. Now, I have excluded, so on the other hand, 21 townland names in Liostaí that are relatively late names of English origin, as there isn't any evidence that these names were Gaeltacht. And they're all there, but I might go back to that in a minute. Go on for a second. In fact, in the case of two of the names here, it's expressly stated in the Ordnance Survey Name Book of 1840 that there wasn't any Irish form, although the people John O'Donovan and the people who came out and did the field work, they actually expressly sought the Irish names. So there was no Irish by the people, no Irish. So I presume these names were probably 18th century or early 19th century, I'd say. And just those four names, the reason I grouped those together is because they contain surnames or personal names, unlike the other little group before that. And I should also point out that although these names are late names, that doesn't mean that the constituent elements, that the surnames are late. Obviously, Butler and Smith are long associated with this area. I just go on here. It's interesting as well that the total number of late English townland names is quite high here actually in the Barony of Ormond. The only, in this Barony v. Liostaí, the only Barony that would have a higher number of late townland names like that weren't Gaelicised would be Ormond Lower. So I suppose that has a lot to do with what happened, I suppose, after the Cromwell implantation and so on. So I just comment on one of the names, one of these late names, if you like, because I think it's kind of interesting, this name, and it's unusual. I think it's a name actually of English origin. However, as you can see, O'Donovan, or in the name book, they wrote it as if in Gaelic script, the old Gaelic script, but when names were recorded, the Irish forms of names were recorded in the name books that were written in the old Gaeltacht, the name books. And this is written in Gaelic, in Irish script, R-O-C-R. You know what this place is, Rocker? No. Yeah, it's by the shore. Yeah. So, but he sits here and he says he wonders, he queries if it's an English name, and I think it is. Now, if you look at what I found in the Oxford English dialect, this word rocker, and some of the meanings that are given for it is, you can see a long wick or sieve, or part of a power room. And I wonder the fact that it's situated by the shore, if that's the meaning of the name. I'm not certain. I speculate maybe that's the meaning of it. So now, having decided how many names we have of Irish origin, of Gaelic origin in the Barney. The next thing I'm going to do is, and I don't know that this won't be too difficult to follow, I don't think it is I'm just going to look at the different types of names. When you group them according to structure, when I say structure, what I mean is if you have a word with one word, or one place name with one element in it, like we say rocker, but that's an English name. That's one type of name. When you have a word with two words, when you have a place name with two words, we say like Bailmua, where you have a noun, which I'm going to call a generic because it has a general significance, followed by an adjective, Bailmua. Compare that to a name like Shanwaya, which is the very same. You have an adjective and a noun, but in this case, the order is reversed. And that sometimes, often in Irish, where the order or the structure of names is different, it actually reflects the age, the comparative difference in age of the names. But the first group that I'm going to look at anyway are names in which you just one word, a single generic noun normally, so just one word. So the first example here, because of this, because you just one word, it's often difficult to assign a date, a specific date to this class of place names. But I'm going to give you a few examples anyway. And the first name here I have, I think, well, I'll get to that in a second, but some of the examples that I've written here down here are Cabra, for instance, on Chabra, and these are all names normally Liostaí, and it's normally translated as bad land. But another meaning of Cabra in Irish, it also means a hut, would be correct here. Another place name would be a place called Luke. I think Luke is called locally, and it comes from Yauch, meaning a place of elms. Now, some of these names with just one word are old, and a good example, actually I saw it on a signpost are coming to town, this place, Rish River, and there's also a town called Rish, and the Irish of it is Ungilish. It's actually written here out in Ungilish in the name book. And again, there are early examples of it in the mid of the watermill, I suppose, of the again, this word, Jiddish, as it's written here, I don't know what it means. Another example of an early name, although in this case its meaning isn't obscure, is this case Dia. This is an early church site, and sometimes Dia just means grey land. So you can see the early examples here are the same, Mochayavo, Dia, Mochayavo of Dia, and so on. And then sometimes you get the name written just as one word, Dia. These are all very early examples now from the annals of the Four Masters, the annals of Ulster. You can see the early example is either just it appears as a simplex, that's just one word, Dia, or else you get more being added after it, or else even you have three elements. You have Dia, more, Mochayavo, the big Dia, or grey area, if you like, of the saint, Mochayavo. So in this case, although it's an early name and well documented, the meaning is clear. Now, some other names, of course, are not in relative terms. They're much. I'm not sure if I got this one. They're much later. So a good example would be the name Grange. There's a Grange in the parish of Holy Cross, and Grange in Irish is Grange, and it's a borrowing from French Grange. And the meaning is an outlying monastic farm, and of course the monastery would have been Holy Cross. But I'm just making the point that Leah is much older than the place name Grange. So it's difficult to date these place names as a general body. But there are quite a few of them. There's about 15% of the total names are in Eli are just place names, simplexes as they're called, just as names with one generic or one simple noun like that. Now, the next group of names that I'm going to look at are nouns or compound names, and I'll explain to you what I'm talking about now in a second, of the type noun plus noun. don't worry now if this sounds a little bit complicated, but basically the names I'm talking about here, they're formed out of two nouns. Okay, so you have Thurles, which is made out of which comes from dag, or an early form of it, dar, and this. And the second one here, gal bui is gaul huole, luchma, and kechai. They're all compound case names made up of two nouns. And the reason this is a very early structure in Irish place names. Place names of this structure began to be replaced by a different type of structure. In other words, they began to become, their demise, if you like, can be traced to about 400 AD. So there's a good chance, although I suppose there was obviously a continuation after that where you had a new structure, a different type of way of making place names coming in. But still, those names in particular, they're early names. So there are 8 place names of this structure in Eli Overty. The first one here, open enclosure, is a normal meaning that's given to it from that and this. There's an interesting article by a scholar called Gregory Toner in Annan, a publication about place names, Annan. He raises the possibility maybe that this also means a palisade. That's, palisade would be if you had a ring fort, and then at the top of it you have a palisade, made out of a wooden palisade. So actually in Irish, this also does refer, can mean palisade. So he suggests maybe that this place in like this Thiobraid, there are other examples of it in Ireland, that it means a palisaded enclosure made of oak. So that's another possibility. The other ones here, gaul huole means stone cattle enclosure. Gaul in this instance means a stone, not a foreigner. And huole would be a kind of a cattle enclosure or an animal enclosure. And I've already talked about Lochmore. Am I saying, is it Lochmore you call it locally? Lochmore, yeah. But Lochmore, again, coming from Luach, meaning rushes, and Clay, Mach. We talked about that word earlier. And the last one there would be Clay High. Clay is also a form of the word Clia, which are having by all Clia, meaning hurdles. Some hurdles made out of wood that were often, Clia that were laid in the river so that cattle could cross. So something like hurdle wood. Now, the remaining place names of this structure that I've given there, I just translated them for you as best I can. Lahor Dawn, which I think might mean the uneven little height, as I think from the half height. Lara, again I think it means the lopsided rath or ring fort. Lachai, I suppose, half wood, and Coolcourt, meaning backfield. Now these may not be as old because La in modern Irish it can be used as a prefix. For instance, what I mean by that is in something like Nahorus, a half door, and this word Coolcourt certainly doesn't seem to be that old either. Again, you have this in modern Irish words, modern Irish compounds like Coolcourt, the back door. So, having talked now about those compound names, I'm going to go on and look at the group, the type of structure that came after that. So, the compound type of case name was gradually replaced by this type of structure, a noun plus a qualifying genitive. I know that might sound complicated now, but I just explained what I'm talking about. The first example here is all, meaning a fort, and the word that qualifies that is this word nid, which is the genitive, which is the genitive of nab. So this basically means the fort of the nest. But in this instance, the qualifying word comes in the second place. The first group, it was the other way around, and these are later in form. So the others are just drown down with the ridge of the goat, and raw eltia, the rat, I suppose, or the ring fort of the doe, D-O-E. So So in this type category, there are 25 examples of this type of name, which is quite high, that's 10% of the total. I've also included in this category this unusual name here, Kugola, or Kugela, I think it's pronounced slowly, Kugela. And the Irish, if it seems to be, Kugela, that's the way it's written in the name book as well. But it's what does it mean exactly? Interestingly enough, the example here it doesn't go back that far in time. This example here from 1743. This is obviously a misspelling, but you can read it as C-O-U, I suppose, Cuyola or Ulster. It's actually translated into Ulster at the time. The only other thing that I can suggest is there's a word in Irish, and it's also found in place names, called Ula, U-L-A, or U-L-A-D-H, this word here, and it means a tomb. Whether that's correct or not, and Cuige is also used in place name besides the name of the provinces to mean actually a division of land, Cuige. So it's just a possibility. Now, the next type of structure, and the one that we're all familiar with in modern Irish, is this. This is the common structure in modern Irish, and this replaced the structure I've just been talking about. The only difference between this and the previous structure is that we have the article. That's all in Irish in use here. So, you remember the last one we had Cuyola, but in this case we have this little word here, no. So, you have Buile no Hau, as you think from Buile Awa. So this would be or Drohan na Farna or Carry Messiah. And this would be the common structure. That would be the way the place names of two nouns, where one noun, where you qualify the other, if you like, or one noun is a generic, and the other is specific. That's the normal way that they'd be that place names like that are created, if you like, in modern Irish. Now, this type of structure, examples of this go back to the 9th century. Although it's modern, it's still been around for a long time. But it only became common in Irish from the 11th century onwards. So from the 9th century, I suppose we can say that it began to replace the Irish structure. There are 37 examples of this structure in Liostaí. So the capital enclosure, I suppose, of the river, Drohan Árann, the bridge of the elder tree, and Cill, the church of the craftsmen, etc. Or maybe craftsmen who work with wood, possibly. And there's almost about 15% of the total number of names belongs to this category. So I just want to go over what I've said up to now, and maybe to make a little bit more sense. So in the Barney Liostaí, there's a small number of compound names of early formation, followed chronologically by names of the type noun plus qualifying genitive, which was in turn replaced by the more modern noun plus definite noun plus genitive. The percentage of 10% for names of the type noun governing genitive of a noun, this structure here now, without the article, is about the same as the percentage of names of a similar structure in County Offaly, for instance. We studied the names of County Offaly, our officers. But it's considerably higher than the names of the same structure in County Waterford. And in the latter County Waterford, there's also a much higher incidence than Liostaí of names which have this later structure, that's noun plus the article plus the noun. So in other words, I believe that when you compare names like that, the names, in other words, put it very, very crudely, the names, looking at their structure in County Waterford, would seem to be a lot more modern than what I just talked about here. That's putting it in very simple terms. Now, there's another group of names that I want to talk about, and that's the names where we have an adjective and a noun, like something like Cill or the big church or something like that, just to see what exactly emerges here. So when we look at these names, first of all, there are 7 groups like this which are compounds, where you have an adjective, in this case shan, which comes before the noun. It qualifies like shan wale, Cluain, and Thiobraid. So these names that have Shan in initial position, they don't really tell us anything about their age, because they would still be used in modern Irish like that. You would still say Shan Daniel. So they don't tell us anything. And Cill is the same. It could belong to any period of Irish. The only thing though about those, when I want to go back to this, is that the word Baile is relatively modern, in the sense that it's not documented in place names until the mid-12th century. It's not found in place names at all. So that leaves me with just one of these compound names here, and that's his name here, Dovey. You probably know where that is. So it means something like black marsh stream or black marshy. Fay is either a marshy stream or it's maybe a marsh, and Dov is black. And the documentation goes back to the beginning of the 14th century. And so I say that this name, where you have an adjective here, so that would be earlier than the 12th century. So that would be, it's possible to the reason I say that is that in modern Irish, if you had a noun and an adjective, Dov, you wouldn't put them together like that. You'd have the Dov would be after the noun it qualifies. Anyway, the vast majority of the place names in which an adjective qualifies a noun are of the type, are of this type, as you would imagine. That's the modern thing in modern Irish. When you have an adjective, far more, the adjective comes after the noun it qualifies, and that's the case in most of the places in which is run into this particular area. So those examples here, or cream, would be fair height or something like that, pleasant height. Creamy Orda, which is a lovely name in a way, it means the small high woods. And the Callanumna, which is the Irish form of the parish of Loughmore East. Calla, actually that's the same as Killy Begs in Donegal. And Calla is the plural form of Chai, a church. That means the small churches. And in this parish of Loughmore East, in the 17th century, the time was bigger than the modern civil parish. There were 6 distinct townlands names beginning with Cill, which is very interesting in one parish. So that's how that name came about, small churches. So this kind of structure here, again, it's very, very common in the place names of Tipperary, of Liostaí. There would be 17% of names that are formed like that. Now, the next type of name that I want to go on and look at are names that have personal names or surnames in the garden name. So, in a way, I suppose, they're a distinct group. So, I firstly look at personal names. So, the number of Gaelic personal names compared to the Anglo-Norman names is quite large. So there are 13 place names in Liostaí that have a Gaelic and Irish personal name. There are only 5 that have Anglo-Norman names, which is interesting given the influence that the Anglo-Normans had on the area. I've also, for that number, the 13 names, I haven't included in that group the names beginning with Cill, for the simple reason that obviously the personal name that comes after Kyle would normally be the saint's name or the name of the founder of the church. So I'm putting those to one side as well. And 2 examples there are Cill Corky, I think it's called, Kyle Corky, and that comes from a female saying called Corcoch, an early name, and of course Cill Árann from the well-known Saint Árann of Natura, the founder of the monster Cill Árann. So I'm going to leave those to one side. Now, I have included that amongst the Anglo-Norman names, Pádraig. And the reason is that it wasn't used as a personal name by Irish families until much later. It was introduced as a personal name by the Anglo-Normans. So the earliest historical example of this name is very interesting as well. You can see it's it's the same as Baile Pádraig in Irish, Baile Pádraig, which would be Pádraig with the diminutive "een" at the end of it. And I just want to read you something from a book, Gaelic Personal Name by Pádraig Ó Cearbhaill and Fidel Maguire, about this name, about Patrick and Pádraig and Pádraig. Patrick came into use among the colonists in Ireland before it became common among the native Irish. When used by the Anglo-Normans, it was rendered Pádraig by the Irish. So I think, and you can see here as well that the name is you have the Irish form of the name and the English form, civil survey. That's quite common as we see. Now the next name I want to look at, the next Anglo-Norman name is Ballydavid or Ballygaw. And the reason that this is interesting is that it gives us evidence of the way that the name was Gaelicized, the Gaelicization of an English place name. Very common in the case of place names that have an Anglo-Norman name, personal name or surname, they were Gaelicized. They were translated, if you like, into Irish. So a good example is this name David here, or Davy, probably the early forms there of the name. Again, when you put it in chronological order, the picture begins to emerge. So you have here David's Town, and here you have the first Gaelic form of the name here. And it's very similar to what written in phonetic English spelling. It's very similar to what I was there, Ballygaw. And then Ballydaw there in the Fiends of Elizabeth I. And you can see the name book is correct. Ballygaw be pronounced Daw. So that's just an example of the way that the names were Gaelicized. Now, just to turn to the names, the Gaelic personal names, I'm not going to say that much about them. That's names where you have a personal name of Irish origin. I think that a lot of them, looking at them, that they seem to be quite early or quite old, these names in the Barn name. And we look at a few examples shortly. One thing worth noting about the names that have a Gaelic personal name, that there's only one example of a Gaelic personal name, that's Cormac, preceded by Baile. As I said, Baile is a relatively late word in place names. The interesting thing about this place name is that the first example there is in Latin. You have the word villa, which often corresponds to town. And then you have after that you have Baile, the Irish name Baile Cormac, I suppose, and then it's translated. You have the English name Cormacstown. And normally when you get villa like that, place name like that in early Latin texts, that's now after the coming of the Normans, it normally stands for, and it's normally, if you like, a Latin translation of an English name where you'd have something like Cormacstown or town. So in fact this name, although you have a personal name here, a Gaelic name, it could actually have been an English name originally. It could actually have been Cormacstown originally, that name. Now, I'm just going to turn to a few other names that are kind of interesting with personal names, Gaelic personal names. The late Diarmuid Ó Murchú, he demonstrated in his article Where Was Rob Nassif, which was published in the Tipperary Journal. He spoke of the place name Cill this place name here. And he showed that this should actually be Coil, C-O-I-L, courage. And that comes from an unusual person name that's found in the pre-normal Onacht, the Onacht group of people, the Onacht genealogies, as Moyle Corkish. And then the other interesting name is Brassel, of course, which is found in raw Brassel, but also in the name Clanbrassel, Brassel. Raw Brassel, of course, was the place where the church senate was held in 1111. Now, there's one other name here, this second one here, this place in Liostaí. That's often explained as meaning Lis Dunaula, the Lis or the fort or the ring fort or of the fort, beside the fort, if you like, of the apple tree. But I think it probably means there's an unusual name in early genealogies of the most frequent people spelled like this, Dunaula. And if you put this before that, that's the form you'll get, this two now. So I think that's the correct form of that name. Now, I have a chart here, and I'm going to go through some of this with you in a minute. I'll just read it a little bit, and then I'll explain to you what all that is about in a second. Place names which have Anglo-Norman surnames, which we'll be talking about now, are not evenly distributed throughout County Tipperary. So there is a greater number of place names that have Anglo-Norman surnames than place names containing Gaelic surnames in quite a few of the baronies. So, what I mean here is that in the barony of Clanwilliam, you have that number of place names with Anglo-Norman surnames, 27 place names, and you have that number of Irish surnames. So it's very even there. In the case of Liostaí, 18 place names have Anglo-Norman surnames. The town is a parish name now, and only 8 have Irish surnames. If and off the east, 19 Anglo-Norman surnames, 12 Irish surnames, and maybe the one with the greatest number of Anglo-Norman names, I suppose, Middleton, which is down around Cashel, you have 61 Anglo-Norman surnames, and you have 13 Irish surnames. So, but that pattern is changed in a few of the baronies, where you have more Irish surnames than Anglo-Norman surnames. So we say in Kerrin you have more Irish surnames than Anglo-Norman surnames, and these two here, Kilnamana, they're both similar. So the point about that is when you look at place names that have Anglo-Norman surnames in them, as compared to place names that have Irish surnames, it tells us a lot, obviously, about the settlement patterns. And I suppose the fact that I just used to classify these according to baronies here, it would give you a more exact picture of the influence of the Anglo-Normans if we were to compare it to the earlier divisions that were used by the Normans, the cantribs. But that will give you a rough idea at any rate of the difference in the different baronies of Tipperary. So there are also French loanwords in the place names of Liostaí that bear witness to the military nature of the Norman conquest. So I've just given you a few there. The word Britus or Britas comes from Britas, meaning a temporary kind of structure, breastwork. Palace Hill comes from the word Palais. The Irish Palais comes from this French word or Anglo-Norman word, and it means a palisade or a fortress. And another word that's kind of interesting as well, because I think it shows in these cases Anglo-Norman occupation, is the word clough. Now, clough, of course, can mean a stone, but it also specifically means in place names a stone structure, a tower house, or a castle. So these two place names would provide evidence of that. Clough Martin, I suppose Clough Martin, which is an Anglo-Norman person name originally, and an Anglo-Norman surname here, Clough O'Reilly, Clough and Rawley. I think both of those were either would probably mean town house. So as I said, the number of Irish surnames in the barony is a lot less than the number of Anglo-Norman surnames. 4 of the surnames which contain Irish surnames have Baile, the place names, a specific element in first initial position. So there are about 8 in all, I think, of Irish surnames that are found in the place names of the barony here, and 4 of them have this word Baile as the first element. There are 2 examples of Ballyerk in Parish of Boyne and Cluain Boris, Ballycahin and Ballycharawn. So, as I said, Bally is relatively late in place names, which is, I'm going to return to that point shortly. Just this last name here, this is also in the parish of Templemore, Pádraig Ó Cearbhaill. And at one time, this area here, Pádraig Ó Cearbhaill, it was actually a much bigger area, the place where the family O'Cahill were settled than Ballycahin. And it was also referred to as Pobal O'Cahill. So basically, this is basically the same name, Kyle, but this would be, if you like, a separate name. This is the same as the surname by the Kyle. And it's in the same name. Yeah. I'm going now to say a little bit more about this element value. So of the 18 place names which have Anglo-Norman surnames in the Barony, 12 have Baile as initial element. The historical evidence for some of the place names shows that they derive from English names of the type surname followed by the word tune or town, which developed into Irish names of the type Baile followed by a Gaeltacht form of the Anglo-Norman name. So a good example here is these names here, as I said, Villa and a name written in Latin is often evidence of, it's actually a translation of an English name normally, which would have tune, an early form of town. You can see this here, an English language place name, Amory's town here, and then you can see that the Gaelic form has emerged by then. That doesn't mean that it was Gaelic, it could have been Gaelicized, I suppose, any time between, let's say, 1300 or 1350 and 1600, but it was Gaelicized by this time. And in this case, the name is an English surname, I suppose, Amory, and it comes from an earlier surname which is found in French and German. And actually, you can see the German form here, Amory, which is actually quite similar to the Latin form. So that's an example of the way the name, an Anglo-Norman surname, the way it was changed or turned into a Gaelic name, if you like. Now, this is another example. In this instance, you have the name Galbert or Galbert. And in this instance, the interesting thing about this is that you have both names in the same example here. You have the English language name, Galbert Town, alias, and the Irish form, Baile, Galbraith, all in one reference. So again, in this part of Tipperary, you have this mixture. It starts off here in the evidence as an Irish name, Baile, Galbraith. Then you have Galbraith Town, and then you have both forms here. Yeah, there's one other group of names that are interesting. There
Put the fire down.
Now, there are three examples in the Barony of VIOT here of place names that have Anglo-Norman surnames preceded by the word raw or ras. And this is interesting in a way because raw, of course, is an Irish name, and the element raw or ringford, it's normally accepted that they became, or what you said, dysfunctional before the coming of the Normans. So these are very interesting. You have the name here, Racunikin, I think it's called, and that actually comes from the name, this Irish name, Shonikin, which in fact is a Gaelicised form of an engine. And Liostaí, Ratlacy, comes from the surname Leach or Leach, I suppose. And the last one here, Pradog. Pradog is found as an English surname Pradog, but it actually comes from the Welsh Caradog. There are two possibilities. Why do you have names, Anglo-Norman names, that with raw as first element, to get the word raw? There are two possible explanations, I would say. One is that they replaced an earlier Irish name, that the raw plus an Irish name was the original name, and then that it was actually replaced by an Anglo-Norman name. And I suggested in my book about Cluain that raw Placid, which we know from the Emmanuel Foods article, it became located to a fairly precise part of Tipperary. There is a possibility, though, that Rob Gassel, in fact, that it was it gave name. It was a forerunner of this name, this Anglo-Norman name, which is in the same area. It's a possibility. And the other possibility has been raised by Gregory Toner in the article I mentioned about Raw and List and place names. I'll just read this out for you. He says, where Raw is qualified by an Anglo-Norman personal name, we may suspect that the original Anglo-Norman place name has been Gaelicized in much the same way as Bali names were often Gaelic equivalents of Anglo-Norman true names. So in other words, the word Raw was used actually by the Normans. There are lots of place names, for instance, in Kildare, in Meath, in the area of the Pale, names like we say John's Ras, names like that, where you have an Anglo-Norman person or surname followed by Ras, and the place names are of English structure. So, in other words, the Anglo-Normans borrowed the word Raw and they use it as Ras. So, names like this with an Anglo-Norman surname, they could have begun as actually English names. I mean, that could have been Leaches or Craddock's Ras originally. But, or else, as I said, the other possibility is that there was an Irish name there before these names came about. Now, I just want to go on now and say a little bit. I'm nearing the end of the lecture we got to know, and I just want to say something about Bali. So the settlement term Bali is a commonest word in the place names of Tipperary. It's a commonest word. It is the initial element of 440 townlands from a total of 2,985. So 440 townlands of about 300 beginning with the word Bali. And it is also found in compound words like Shanbali and Corbali, which I've already spoken about. Now, there aren't that many examples where Bali is specific element. That's where Bali is the second part of the place name, like there's Liostaí in Ireland, but it's not common. So in total, the word Bali features in about a sixth of the county's townland names. As regards Liostaí, about 14% of the townland names have this word contained the word Bali, which is quite high as well. The interesting thing about Bali, though, as I said, is it is not documented in place names until the mid-12th century. Now, obviously, Bali must have been established in place names before it was documented in place names. But how long before the mid-12th century, when we have the earliest sources, we don't know. The meaning of the word Bali originally in Irish just meant a place. And gradually then it took on the meaning of a homestead of a particular family or family group, and then the lands of the group. So the homestead of the family and then the lands associated with the homestead. So normally the easiest way to translate it in modern Irish is just to use town or townland. There are early examples of place names with Bali in a charter to Holy Cross Abbey, which is dated 1185 to 1186, and that's found in the first volume of the Árann deeds. So you have names like Bali Kelly, which is still extant, Bali Kelly. Do you know where that is? And there are other names in the same charter, like this and this. They, as far as I know, most of these other names with Bali in the same charter, this early charter, they're extinct, as far as I know. But you can clearly see, though, that they're still names of the type Bali followed by a surname. So this is probably Bali ni Hovan, ni Huwan, Bali ni Horkaran, but I don't think those names survive. So that would be the common pattern, when you say, of names of this type. Now, Bali is also used with Anglo-Norman names, Anglo-Norman surnames and personal names. In the county as a whole, there are 157 examples of Bali and the surname or personal name of Anglo-Norman origin. And as I said, they're often used to translate names of the type an Anglo-Norman surname followed by town or tune. So we can say certainly this much, that Bali, the use of Bali in place names was accelerated by the Anglo-Normans. And the opposite is also true. So in some counties where there's very little influence very little Anglo-Norman influence, you'll get very few names with Baile. In County Leitrim, which I recently researched, for instance, there are only 14 names with Baile out of a total of 1,500. So it's completely, radically different from what the picture that emerges here in Tipperary. But I should say that the pattern of Baile names in County Tipperary is more complex than just the Anglo-Norman influence. In the two Ormond baronies, for instance, which weren't as affected by Anglo-Norman settlement as Ely Overdean, there are still 15% of townland names with Baile's initial elements, so there's still a very high percentage of names. There is only one barony in Tipperary out of the 12 baronies that has less than 10 examples of Baile as initial element, and that's Kilnaman Outward. So I'm just about to finish now, and this table enumerates in order of frequency the number of examples in the barony of Ely Overdean that occur 3 times or more as initial elements in townlands. So basically, these are just very common words that occur as initial. The first word in the barony of Ely Overdean, and I give the number of examples, this would be in the townlands and parish names. I also want to point out that in this example, I included as well with words that are derivative of the basic words, of the initial word, of the basic noun. So in the case of Kai, there are 10 examples, but this number would include all these words. Kai, Cluain means a small wood. Cluain is a plural of the small little woods. Cluain would be probably the place of small woods, and logainmneacha would be the half wood. So, but still, that will give you an example of the words that are most commonly found at the beginning of the place names in Ely Overdean. Just one or two points, one or two things that I'd like to point out to you. One is Cill Church. There's actually quite a few in this barony. As I said, there's one particular group within one parish, but even allowing for that, it's still quite high. So, you know, whether the people of this part of the country, but they're very religious or not. And there's also a good few examples of Knock, a hill, which obviously is reflective of the landscape. And these words here, lis and raw, they have about equal distribution in the placement. And normally, in the placement of the barony, normally they have the same meaning, general meaning in the placement. They would mean, I suppose, a ring fort would be the general meaning. Although as I said, this can also mean a palisade. But it's interesting that there are more or less evenly, there's about an even spread of both, because I'll show you now in a minute in the case of the baronies of Ormond, there's a big difference. Cluain, sometimes related as a meadow, but he's probably in his pasture, probably west pasture. There are a good few examples of mowing, meaning a bog, and I'd say the rest are probably, or all means a wood as well. Again, I'd like to draw your attention to the woods. There are some, of course, as you can say, as you would expect, there are some names beginning with Kai, the wood, and also Goran, meaning rose. But it's not, there aren't a huge number of names. So that's in County Tipperary now as a whole. I'm not going to go into this in detail now, but there would be words that occur in initial position as first element in the names of County Tipperary. So we've already talked about Baile, Knock and so on. And you can see here that there are more examples of, again, it's interesting as well, there are so many examples of Kai. Again, you can see the disruption that happened, you know, the amount of woods that have been erased, I suppose, over the centuries, that there were that many townland names in the beginning of that word. But you see there are more examples of this than of raw in Tipperary as a whole. And just Ormond, which is the northernmost baronies, they're close enough, of course, to where we are here. Again, as I pointed out, Baile is the most common word, even though it wasn't as influenced by the Anglo-Normans as some other parts of Tipperary. The second element is interesting, Kai. It shows again the amount of woods that you had in that part of Tip. And in this instance, there's a big difference between the instance of Lis, with 34 examples, and Raw, which is down here 28 examples. So whether that shows a kind of a bias whereby you have more examples of this in the north of the county than in the south, I'm not sure. I'd have to map all of the examples to see if that's true. This and raw are not found evenly distributed throughout Ireland. Raw isn't found very much in the northern part of Ireland, and this isn't found very much in Leinster. So there's a kind of an interesting spread there, I'd say. And I say, one more slide here. Yeah. And then when we classify those words, in the Barony of Árann according to their meaning, I just grouped them there for you very simply. So those words: physical features, cnug, Cluain, maw, meaning in plain and or height, vegetation, coil, dale and oakwood, although dale can also just mean a grove, originally an oakwood, but there are examples where it can simply mean a grove, Goran, again a grove. Settlement terms, we discussed all those I think, except for Groid. There are a few examples of the word Groid. It's normally translated as a village, but Kenneth Nicholas has suggested in an article that it could mean cattle steading, a place where cattle were kept, and as compared to Gráinseach, which would mean a grain producing farm. I don't know whether that's correct or not. This and raw we discussed. Vale, there are a few examples. It's nearly always followed by awe. Vale awe. I can't think of what example there is any like over. There is an example of Vale awe something. Yeah, that's right. So I think Vale awe I think. Vale awe, yeah, that's right. And Vale means of course the mouth, but basically in placing it means the approach. The opening, the approach to the art, to the fort. And then cultivation, bawn, means fallow land. Buile, Cluain and Gort is a field. And while a cruy just means, it's normally translated as a nook. A nook or just a corner of land, something like that. And farm, I suppose, would mean territory. So I think I leave that. Okay?